Welcome. We're so glad you're here. Publishing Perspectives Forum is presented by Publishing Perspectives. We're online every day, Monday through Friday, free to read. And as I think a lot of you know, because I recognize a lot of you as our very handsome readership, a lot of you know that, in fact, our mission from Frankfurter Buchmesse itself is the international industry. And so this is our heyday when we're here in Frankfurt every year. We run ourselves into the ground, but we love every minute of it, and we get to see all of you again. So thank you for being here. We're starting our program with our headliner, a marvelous hour that we have for you here with Nihar Malaviya, from the CEO of Penguin Random House, the worldwide CEO. This is a bit confusing for some who are not familiar with the system, although he sits in New York, as we say. There is a U.S. Penguin Random House, of course. This man is the worldwide Penguin Random House CEO. And if I embarrass you a little, he's a very fine speaker and a delightful guy, so I think you'll enjoy it. We first spoke in Bologna, and it's been a great thing knowing him a little bit. Actually, I will tell you that Nihar started with Bertelsmann 20 years ago, I think in 2003. And we went in the entrepreneur program. So the next time you meet one of these guys with a good startup, pay attention. There is hope in that line of work. He ended up winning awards, as a matter of fact, from Bertelsmann itself in entrepreneurism and started working his way up. He has come out of has marketing, an MBA from the Stern School. Many of us are familiar with it. And he also has, this is going to thrill you because we will talk about AI. He has a computer science bachelor's, so he's really good with this subject. And I'm delighted to have him here. Nihar, thank you for joining us. It's so good to have you.
No, it's so great to be here, and thank you, Warder, for basically giving me the opportunity to actually have this talk. I'm really looking forward to it.
It's our pleasure. It's really great to have you. We're happy because this is one of the first times that Nihar has had a chance to appear in public, and we want to make sure that the dialogue begins as he becomes the new CEO and takes over. He started in January, was it originally?
Yes, correct.
Right, exactly. So he's, we're going to be very gentle. He's very new to the job, but he has plenty of experience. We're going to do this, since this is the largest publisher in the world we're talking to. We're going to start at the largest size. We're going to talk about the macroeconomic situation that he sees when he looks at the world of publishing. One of the great things I think is so interesting, Nihar, about your job is that you have to see the horizon. You have to actually look at the very highest levels because this company is working in more than 200 countries. It's just an amazing thing. The books are going into that many countries, and there are offices in how many now? 19, 20,
20-ish, yeah. 20. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, nations around the world. And so he's looking at that very high level, and he's looking at the ground level as well. It's a very complex view, but it's one that nobody else has because nobody has to work at quite those two extremes like Nihar and his staff do. So, Nihar, can you start by giving us then some concept of what you see when you look at the macroeconomic picture? Where do you think things are? And for God's sake, tell us where they're going.
Where they're going is obviously an impossible thing to predict, but we started, unfortunately. But
I tried.
We start with at least like just a brief historical perspective on this. And if you just even go back from when I started in publishing, about 20 plus years ago, and look at it from that perspective to now, if you think about all of the change that has happened, obviously in our industry, but much more importantly in the broader world of media. And everything, like if you think about like 2003, it feels like very hard to imagine, but smartphones didn't really exist. Social media didn't really exist. Obviously, AI was a completely theoretical construct that people had been working for 50 years on, but not going anywhere at all. E-commerce had just started and was barely a very small blip. Obviously, ebooks were there, but like no one was reading. So in every which way, if you think about how much the world has changed and how every other industry within media has been impacted by this. So you talk about books, you talk about magazines, newspapers, music, television. Books have actually in this time frame fared much, much better than most other segments of media. So I think that to me is like the best thing about our industry, because we're bringing something to readers that they're really not finding in any other form of media. And so now, even today, we're basically selling more books than we did 20 plus years ago. I think if you just look at it from that perspective, it's really astounding and remarkable where we stand as an industry through everything that has gone on. Like, even a decade back, many of us were wondering what is going to happen to the industry with the onslaught of everything that was going on. Will readers even have time to read books? Their attention spans are fracturing. All of the topics that we even talk about today. But the reader has proved to be really, really resilient. The reader has really led this industry forward, and that is the number one thing that I always think about, is just what is the reader doing and where is the reader going. So I think that really grounds everything that we look at. Then if I just look at the recent past, what has happened is, obviously during COVID, and this was different in different markets of the world, but in generally, we had a rise in readership, and we had a rise in book sales, because of course people were at home, and books provided an easy means of escape and entertainment while they were at home. In most markets around the world, what has happened since then is obviously sales have normalized a bit, and they're down compared to what they were at the peak of COVID. However, they are higher than they were before COVID. Again, this is not true of all the markets that we operate in, but it's generally true of most of the markets that we operate in. So again, even from that, like a relative short-term perspective, from a readership perspective, from an overall industry dynamics perspective, again, we are selling more books now than we did before COVID. So that is a great positive for us. Obviously, the other thing that has happened during the same time is costs have increased for everyone in each and every industry. And that has been true for other industries. That has also been true of publishing. So, of course, everyone has to wrestle with that in some way, shape, size, or form. But I think if I look at the macro perspective, reading is extremely healthy. And as long as the reader is basically interested in books, and at this point there's not a single shred of data that shows that they're not, I think the state of the industry is going to be very, very robust.
I think that's fascinating. I see we have Michael Tamblyn with us, the CEO of Rakuten Kobo. And one of the things that he's been so good at talking about in the past is, there you are, is the attention economy. And I'm fascinated by hearing you say that reading is holding on so well at a time when we think that the layman looks at this and thinks, oh, no, they're watching Netflix now. They're listening to music now. It's all on the same phone. They're never going to read again.
Exactly.
But this isn't happening.
No.
They're continuing to read. What is the attraction? Do you know? Can you get it? Because I don't actually understand that.
Well, at the end of the day, I mean, if you think about it, there are two interesting things here. A, not only are people reading. If you'd asked anyone a decade ago or 15 years ago whether the primary sales in the industry would be in physical books,
yeah, right.
Almost everyone would have said no at this point in time.
Exactly.
So not only are they reading, they're reading actually primarily, not exclusively, but primarily in physical books. Yep. So I think that is the fascinating thing. Why? I mean, the interesting thing is, obviously, the physical book itself is a 500-plus-year-old. The printed book in its current format is a 500-year-old format.
Right.
So that means that it withstood the test of time. Like people, obviously, it's a great format. It's extremely flexible. You can have a big book, you can have a small book, you can have a mid-sized book, you can have a 4-color book, you can have a 1-color book. Mm-hmm. It's a very flexible format. It can be priced in a variety of different ways. And it's a format that people have grown up with and that people are intimately familiar with it. And it's a great format. That is why it's endured for centuries. Now, what is within those pages are stories, mostly. Even if they're nonfiction, they're stories or information or knowledge. And storytelling has obviously been around for millennia. Right. It's as old as humans are. So even today, if you think about it, so much of other media, whether it's movies or television or so on, starts with books.
Right.
And the diversity of stories that we tell with books is astounding. There are only, probably, like, I think, less than 1,000 new movies released every year. There are more than 1 million plus new books released every year. So just the diversity is there. So that means there is a story available for anyone and everyone who would be interested in that story. And I think at the end of the day, reading is giving an experience to readers that is unique and unparalleled, and which is why it is sustained.
I think you're right about that. The closest I can come to understanding the appeal is what I call the movie in your mind. The fact that you're working so intimately in your head with the author, crafting whatever visuals may come to you rather than having them handed to you by somebody who may be a very fine director, but nevertheless it's not your vision. And I think that's important. I have heard, is this number right, that Penguin Random House itself produces some 16,000 new titles every year?
Yes.
That's incredible. That is just astonishing. What a number. And yet it's still working, as you say. They're reading. They want those books.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as I said, like, in our industry, more than 1 million plus are being produced. So, like, we're a fraction.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. To think that you're a fraction, that's
Yes.
incredible. No, it's an astonishing success story.
Yes.
And yet we have to perpetuate it. We have to make it work
Yes.
and everything. So let's now look. I mean, we're looking at the horizon now on the macro level. Let's look at something closer to the ground, and particularly for your company, what is the strategy that you use in the marketplace for Penguin Random House, knowing that the macro looks like it does? What does this tell you need to do with your company?
At the end of the day, again, we operate in markets which are extremely robust. So I think knowing that, what we have to do is, we are a firm believer in our mission. Our mission is to ignite a universal passion of reading by creating books for everyone. And at the end of the day, we know that every book that we put out there and every book that we sell basically impacts someone. It gives them entertainment, it gives them escape, it gives them knowledge, it gives them information, it can uplift them, it can help them get through a tough time. So our goal at the end of the day is to create more books and sell more books. It's like basically as simple as that. And that's what we're really focused on. And how we are organized is that we have 320 independent imprints around the world. And each and every one of those imprints makes their own decision about what to do, which way to go, and what to publish. And we really encourage that. Basically, editorial independence amongst our imprints. And really, one of the things that I have learned through my couple of decades in publishing is that there are many, many different pathways to success. There's no single path. And that's why we really encourage our publishers. One person has one pathway to success, another person has a different pathway to success, and that's totally fine, because that's the publishing world overall.
This is something that Bertelsmann talks about in your leadership, is that you've created such entrepreneurship, if you will, based, I'm sure, on your own experience, for the various imprints, for the companies around the world. They're running what they know to be what they need. I've been very excited about the Singapore house. I think that it's off to a great start. I understood they just produced their first translated piece, which is fantastic. It's great to see a new one, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's still growing. It's just an incredible thing. What do you have a great, when we talk about the content itself, you have a great phrase called cyclical trends that I've heard you talk about. Is that something that you can explain to us means what when you say this to your staff? How do you say to them, watch for the fluctuations that this indicates are going by? How do you talk about it?
Yes. So, I mean, again, having looked at basically book industry trends for like 20 plus years, the one question I'll almost always get asked is like, okay, what are the trends right now? What is happening? And there's always trends in the industry. There have always been some trends. So obviously right now what has happened since the pandemic is there has been a rise, especially in fiction, and especially in commercial fiction, in many of the markets we operate in. And I will give you one really interesting example of this. Obviously, one of the reasons why this has happened is because of course, the rise of TikTok, and the rise of TikTok in terms of influencing books, which, by the way, is just an interesting aside. It's a great combination of the newest form of media meeting the earliest form of media, and both coexisting and working very well together.
Yeah.
But so to give you an example, I went to India recently, and I met with my niece, who was like 13 years old, and she lives in like a mid-sized town in India. And what I saw is, like, when I was there, like a parcel came in a book delivery, and it had a whole bunch of Colleen Hoover books in it. Now, again, we don't publish Colleen Hoover, not our author, but so this is not an advertisement.
It's okay.
But obviously, she has sold millions and millions of copies around the world, primarily through TikTok, and being extremely famous on TikTok. The interesting thing about India is India has banned TikTok for the last 3 years.
Wow.
So it's not available at all in the country. And despite that, an author who writes in a completely different setting is reaching a 13-year-old kid, which I don't even know if it's age-appropriate content or not, but reaching that. So I thought that is just like an interesting, fascinating example of trends. But if I just, again, take a step back, that's what's happening right now. What happens in the industry is, like, in the broadest terms, there are like cycles that we go through, and these cycles may last like 5, 6, 7, 8 years, depending on the trend. So if you think about it, like, if you go back to when I started in the industry, the biggest success story, of course, was Harry Potter. And that continued on into a whole bunch of young adult book trends. So you had Twilight, you had Hunger Games, you had Divergent, you had John Green, you had property after property that sold millions and millions of copies around the world that started. And then all of a sudden, that trend basically subsided. At the same time, when that trend subsided, and of course that trend was not just young adults buying those books, there was adults reading those books. Then all of a sudden, at the highest level, you had nonfiction. And nonfiction books started selling well. And then, since the pandemic, now we have had fiction books start selling well. So all of these trends basically come and go. And at least our advice to people inside the company is, at the end of the day, what matters is that you have a very good book that resonates with readers, regardless of the category that you're publishing in. Because we are a generalist publisher. We publish across all categories. And even today, like, in a time in which, let's say, commercial fiction is doing very, very well, the biggest book in many of the markets that we operate in this year that has been published by us is a nonfiction book, which is Prince Harry's Spare. So you can have incredible successes with any category you want, as long as the book is great and it resonates with readers. So that's what we basically encourage our people to do.
And you write about the cycles. I mean, they're fascinating in that sometimes one has a very slow burn coming.
Yes.
And then it lasts and lasts and lasts. And you do see them go down quickly when they're over. A little alarmingly sometimes when you've got a lot of copy ready and it's not that thing anymore. But I know that in nonfiction, what was so interesting, particularly in the States, was watching politics drive nonfiction for so long. And that's still happening to a degree. It's not where it was, of course, but that was an interesting trend because, in a sense, we had almost forgotten that connection.
Right.
We had not seen that impetus behind nonfiction for a while, and boy, did we see it for a while there. It was really huge, and still is to some degree. Yeah, it's fascinating to see these things. I want to ask you, as long as we're into content issues and how to handle content and how to move content, the decision came out from several of our major houses, including yours, to work with Spotify on audiobooks. And everybody was quite interested. I think about a week and a half ago, there was the introduction from Daniel Ek, the CEO at Spotify, of about 150,000 audiobook titles going into Australia and the UK at first. They are to come to the United States, but there's some issues being worked out still for the States, and then they'll move into other markets as well. A lot of people have watched for this because Spotify, like your films and everything else, is right on that phone, and a lot of people have hoped that this will introduce people to audiobooks if Spotify will pick them up and make them available. The question I have for you, Nihar, is that in the past, I know that your company, and you were not alone, of the majors, was worried or reticent in some way about going into any kind of subscription, which has been, of course, the main impetus, as Javier Celaya can tell us here. He works in Spain so well with audiobooks. The audiobook drive has gone through subscription in so many cultures, and in most cultures, I think. And yet this was something that you had stood out from. What has changed? Can you tell us something about that arrangement?
Yeah, in a way, from our perspective, our stance, I think, is still very consistent. We had we have we have been against unlimited access subscription.
All right. Right.
And for example, I mean, obviously one of the bigger retailers in the audiobook marketplace and who has done a great job developing the audiobook market, it has been Audible. And Audible is effectively, from a consumer perspective, a subscription. It's a different form of a subscription than how Spotify works, but it is a subscription. So we have participated in various different subscription models, and this was from our perspective, a limited access subscription model. And at the same time, it was also a model where the compensation that we are receiving and our authors, most importantly, our authors are receiving, is basically commensurate to what we're getting from the marketplace overall. So I think from both of those two perspectives,
Right.
That's what made us comfortable in participating in this specific offering. Of course, the audiobook market overall has grown, has developed, thanks to obviously all of the work that everyone around the industry has done to create audiobooks, as well as the great work that our retail partners have done to really popularize the format. Spotify does have hundreds of millions of paying subscribers and around the entire world. And of course, there is a chance that their entry does reach people who are not currently listeners and or readers, and can bring new people into the reading ecosystem and or the listening ecosystem.
Right.
So there is the potential there.
So by creating a subscription that offers tiers, I call them, where you'll pay a certain amount to your subscription if you read maybe 10 hours or listen to 10 hours a month. Maybe twice that if you listen to 20 hours. And then if you're a voracious listener, there's a very big, expensive subscription for you. Nicholas Sandin is doing this out of Norway with BookBeat. He had a standing flat rate subscription, and it just wasn't working for the publishers. This seems to be helping because as the more gets listened, the more comes in. So is it possible to say then that this is almost like being paid per audiobook as you would on the open market?
Yeah, I mean, again, I can't go into the exact arrangements that we have with various retailers because of confidentiality, of course.
Right.
But yes, we are basically interested in models where we are basically getting paid.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
there is a certain logic.
Yes, exactly.
So none of those free services, just give it up. That's great. Thank you for that clarification.
Exactly.
Now, all right, we've reached the moment you're all here for. We can set our hair on fire and talk about AI now. I tell you what I find so fascinating about AI is that we all are rather torn about it because there are obvious advantages in some areas of publishing for AI. There are things that it can do. I call it the back office systems that it can handle and do and enhance and really take care of a great deal of work and speed it up. At the same time, as soon as you get close to the content, you're talking about a totally different situation, aren't you? Tell us something about your field with all of your good experience, particularly in computer science. How do you see the rise of AI, rapid rise?
Yes, I mean, obviously, artificial intelligence in general hasn't been, from a technology perspective, has been technology that's literally started in the 60s and has been with us forever. Basically, even within the artificial intelligence field, of course, there is the field of generative AI, which just really exploded into public consciousness when ChatGPT was launched back in November of last year, and has really made big strides since then. So the first thing we look at is, of course, the most important thing for us to do is to do whatever we can to protect our authors' copyrights. So from an AI perspective, this is different by every jurisdiction that we operate in and every market. The laws are different. But the key question is, can copyrighted content be ingested into these LLMs without the permission of the copyright holder is one question. And then the other question is, can content coming out of the LLMs be copyrighted? Both of those two questions, I think, aren't resolved yet legally. And it'll probably take some time for them to be resolved in the various marketplaces. But we are, of course, supporting all of the efforts that are going on so that copyright is protected to the extent that legally can be. So I think that's like the most important aspect for us as far as AI is concerned. The second part about that, how we think about it is, and this is what we have, so the other form of AI, which obviously was most prevalent before then, was something called machine learning. And what our experience with that has been, we have been working with that for about a decade now. And what our experience with that has been that it's not about, in many cases, people are basically drawing this stark distinction between humans versus machines. It's in our mind, it's not an or, it's an and. It's humans using machines. So we have basically done studies in the machine learning field where we basically let just people do some things, we let just machines do something, and then we have people and machine working together. That combination always outperforms either of those two. So in a way, technology has always been a tool for people. And every aspect of that, of technological development, has, if you go back to like desktop computing, and when that started, or obviously the internet, and when that started, it's really how do you use that tool to further whatever your goals and objectives are. And obviously, as long as hopefully we can resolve the various copyright issues around that, then it really becomes, how can you use this? How can, to really help us do our jobs in a better way? So that's how we always think about it, is how can we help people use this technology? Because the technology is not going away. It is here to stay.
Which takes us back to the whole digital transformation.
Yes.
We had to keep saying to some folks, it's not going away. We're not going backward.
Exactly.
At the same time, I mean, I have a friend who is in Oxford at a very fine company. He runs there. They work a lot in AI, including with OpenAI. He was one of the early testers. And he said that he's come very clear in his mind that when you talk about the kind of technical capacity that we're saying when an employee works with a machine, when it is both, not either or, that normally doesn't have ethical problems to it. For the most part, it's like your lawnmower. It's a way to get your grass cut faster, right? It's when we get into the copyright questions. And when we get into the questions of why do we perceive, a lot of us perceive Silicon Valley as not talking about training the big machines. Right? Yes, the LLMs. What do we do with that particular moment? And do you... Not to say you're sitting around with tech geniuses all day long, but when you are in touch with people who are leading this side of the industry, do they really understand the importance of copyright? Is that clear on the tech side?
Well, I mean, some of them do and some of them don't.
And some of them don't, right.
So there is no monolithic tech side.
You would think they know it, though, because they have to protect their own work, yeah?
Yes. But this is where, again, the technology industry, from their perspective, they always believe that they need to innovate, and then eventually someone will tell them whether they should stop or not stop. And unfortunately, the legal system and the regulatory system always follows. So, and this has happened a number of times in the past, with a variety of different cases, obviously. Most famously, obviously, Napster, which thought that they had to upend the music industry until effectively they were ruled to be legal.
Boy, that takes me back from
exactly.
That's right.
Or even Google Books within the book arena.
I've seen this before, haven't we?
Exactly. So this happens over and over enough, and I think what has happened, especially in the United States, where most of this activity is centered in, is that there's been basically lawsuits brought by a whole set of different copyright holders, including, of course, authors, against these companies. And I think the resolution of those lawsuits will basically give us clarity exactly on how this question gets resolved.
Any sense for how much time this takes? I mean, do we think maybe in 5 years we have a good understanding of where the lines are, or longer?
I think so. I think so. I think 5 years definitely. Probably sooner would be my guess. But
it seems right to me, because this is all based on the digital revolution. We don't have to go all the way from the bottom up.
Exactly.
I hope. Good. I think we can make it for another 5 years, right? And finally have this worked out. I want to shift gears a little bit, and in doing this, I want to tell you something. I'm speaking to you as a Southern United States citizen. I am from Charleston, South Carolina, and one of the things we are very fond of our part of the country. Of course, Southerners are close to the land. We are also not necessarily the best people in our politics at times. The Deep South is probably the locus of the far right and its movement these days in the United States. And one of the greatest things that Nihar's company did about 2 weeks ago during Banned Books Week, was it 2 weeks ago? Has it been?
Yep.
Yeah, it was just fascinating. Set up something called the Bandwagon, like get on the bandwagon, but it's spelled B-A-N-N-E-D. And the Bandwagon drove into at least four markets: Nashville, Houston, right across the southern belt, right through my country, handing out the banned books. Is this incredible? Free, giving people copies of 10 of the Penguin Random House titles that have been banned, that have had these actions taken against them. It was the most amazing thing. And had we not been in preparation for Frankfurt, I actually would have flown to one of these stops to see this happen and to watch what happened when the bandwagon arrived. They were working with local bookstores.
Exactly.
They were working with local organizations to hand out the very books, put them in their faces, right? Say, this is the book you thought was awful. Try reading it. You might think something different. Fascinating effort. And this is just one of many that I'm going to ask Nihar about. I want to tell you, though, we are the locus, unfortunately, right now. The States is of banned books, although this is not limited to just this part, our part of the world. In the 2022-2023 school year, the immediately past school year, PEN America has tracked 3,362 instances of banned book actions going on. Fascinating is the part about this is coming from about 11 people who run very powerful organized consortiums of advocates for banning books. And so this is not by any means just one parent here and one parent there waking up in the morning and say, I don't like what Johnny just read. This is actually an organized problem we're facing. And so in a way that makes it better. There are organized ways to go at it, and the courts are working very hard, particularly thanks to the Association of American Publishers. Nihar is on the board. And Maria Palanti, our terrific president, is here this week. If you get a chance to meet her, they are really taking this thing seriously and making great strides in the courts. But talk to me about this whole banning action that's going on. There was just an instance in France coming right out of the Interior Ministry where a book was put under special constraints as to how it could be sold and to whom it could be sold. But in the States, it's gone through the roof. I love these things that you're doing, a resources tool, everything. Tell us about how you're approaching these things, Nihar.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll basically, obviously, as you said, this is a global issue, but I'll focus this answer mostly on the States because this is where the issue has really exploded,
Right,
as you stated, in the last several years.
right.
And I think, I mean, we are obviously, at the end of the day, we are deep believers in freedom of expression.
Yeah.
And we believe that every story has a right to be published. And much more importantly, we also are great believers in access. And what libraries do, which is where most of this effort is centered on, is give access to people. Like, I'll give you a personal story. When I came to this country, and when I was basically 13 years old, one of the things I really relied on was the school library of the high school that I went to. We actually had a lunch period, which was roughly 45 minutes. I trained to eat myself as fast as I possibly can, which was usually between 10 to 15 minutes, so I would have at least half an hour each day where I could go into the school library and read a book because I didn't know anything about the US history or European history, really. And this was the easiest way for me to learn that outside of the normal school setting and the classroom. So just the access that libraries provide to people of all stripes and to people of all communities. And especially most of these efforts are really centered around books that are written by or about marginalized communities. And the fact that someone can go in and read a book that reflects themselves and feel the part of the world is something that we are really passionate believers in. And that's why we are basically, I think, we take this issue extremely seriously. And we are doing everything we can from many different perspectives. On the legal front, we have been parties to lawsuits. We have been basically supporters of other lawsuits that have been filed to stop what we believe is an unconstitutional activity that's going on right now. On the communications front, as you saw, as you pointed out, the wonderful example of the banned book wagon, as well as other activities that we really have to, again, create public awareness of this, to, again, start to really create an organized movement against this versus, obviously, the very deeply funded and the very well-organized movement that is interested in banning books. And unfortunately, especially in the United States, this has become a political issue. And because we do not believe this is a political issue. We believe this is a freedom of expression issue that goes against any politics. You can have any personal political belief. We don't think this is a political issue, but it has become a political issue, which means it's going to escalate, especially as we go into the 2024 election cycle. And we're very well aware of that, and that's why we have basically taken all the steps that we have this year. We take our overall leadership of this topic on behalf of the entire industry very seriously. And we're also working with a variety of industry bodies, whether it's the American Association of Publishers, whether it's PEN America, to really, on all of these various, or the American Library Association, on all of these various efforts to really help support people from a legal perspective, but also from their teachers and librarians who are at the front line of this fight. And we're trying to do whatever we can to also help support them along with our authors.
Yeah, that's so important. The librarians have really been caught in the middle on this.
Yes.
And in some cases, they're taking terrible treatment from their communities. When this stuff gets into your face, it can be very frightening. There's a lot of intimidation going on. There again, that's where the court actions that you're participating in is so important. The PRH also has a very fine site online, which is a resource kit about banned books. It tells you how to think about them, how to understand the issue, how to know whether it's political or whether it's something else, and then where the groups that can support you are, if you're a librarian, if you're a teacher, if you're a reader who just wants to get involved. It's really terrific. I find this feels modern to me in that now you've been in the business longer than I've been covering it, but in my experience, this is a bit out there for a company, particularly of the size of Penguin Random House, to be leading the way like this. In the older days, which means about 10 years ago is all, I would have thought of publishing companies as being a little bit more decorous, a little bit quieter about this. Oh, let's not ruffle anybody's feathers. Now you guys are right out there, like driving the bandwagon right through the place. It's great. Is it?
Yes.
Does that feel like a change to you too? Is that?
I mean, again, I don't know whether it would feel like a change. I mean, there are many, obviously, issues out there in the world. On this specific issue, we really deeply believe it. This goes against the core of what we do. Mm-hmm. We're here to bring different voices to the world.
Right.
And give all of those voices platforms. And this really stops that. And that's why, and as you said, what basically has become very, very clear is this started with in a grassroots ways, but it has now been extremely organized. Right. So what we need to do is we need to respond with an organized effort on our side. Right. And we basically, because of our position in the industry, we thought we can actually galvanize people and we can organize an effort against this extremely well-organized effort that is going on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. You really can, and you're doing it. I think it's great. Now, having mentioned the multiplicity of voices that we want to bring forward, that gets us into issues of diversity and equality and inclusivity, as we say in England, inclusion in the United States. That seems to have been, I don't want to say, even put it in a past tense of that kind, it just seems to be an issue that burned very hot for us through many good parts of the industry in many of our markets around the world for a time, and now it seems to have subsided a little bit in terms of its industry, like a cyclical trend, just in something we talk about in terms of how we want to work and who we want to be in the community as publishers. How do you see this? How do you hold this dynamic? And do you think it really has lost its energy, or is that just a journalist's view?
Yeah, well, I can't speak about any other companies within the publishing world, but I can just speak about ours. And for us, this issue is basically as resonant as it ever was. And the reason being is this. At the end of the day, we are operating in markets that are diversifying. So our mission is to create books for everyone. And if we are operating in markets which are diversifying, one of the key things we have to do is we have to have an employee base that is reflective of that society. Now, publishing is, of course, such a great industry that everyone who comes in publishing never ever leaves, which means turnover in publishing is much lower, which means, and given the existing demographics of publishing, which means changing the employee base takes a long time. because of that. So what we look at least, and what I personally look at, is just the employee base of new hires. The people that we're hiring, how does that reflective of society? And at least I can say, at least for our company, in the various markets that we operate in, we have made substantial progress on that front compared to where we were 5 years ago. So at least that part seems to be going, but it's going to be a multi-decade effort just because the dynamics of the industry.
Yeah, and you're right, and it's very vexing because a lot of us would like to see fast change in this regard, and you're right, Nihar, in that we can't fire half of your existing staff. I mean, this is usually these are very good staff.
Exactly.
For heaven's sake.
Exactly.
It's just that they may not match the demographics of
Yes.
the community they've been working in for so long. So it is a slow process, and it does have to come from the new blood coming into the company. I suppose it's impossible really to look at a time frame, but hopefully within 5 to 10 years we get more reflection of the communities we serve. Yeah.
No, definitely.
Is that reasonable? Yeah.
Exactly. And then the other part of it is just obviously the books we publish.
Yeah. Right.
And we have to make sure that the books we publish are also reflective of society. Again, and we do it for two reasons. One is we believe we have a cultural mission, and we obviously have a commercial objective.
Right.
And we think they're completely aligned in this issue. Our cultural mission is to just go out there and create books that stand the test of time, and to create books that actually resonate with as many people as possible. So culturally, creating books that, again, represent the societies that we work in fulfills that part of our mission. And commercially, because the markets are diversifying, it's imperative for us to continue to find new readers. And creating books that resonate with those readers is also commercially good for us. So from both perspectives, this is something that we care about because it's also a pathway for us to grow. And it's a pathway for us to, again, bring more books to new audiences.
There's economic as well as civic
Exactly,
synergy here.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And it has to be taken advantage of as quickly as possible. Now that you've mentioned books, and I think we have just enough time before I have to let you go, what are you reading? And what are you looking forward to? And if it's Simon & Schuster, that's okay. We won't tell Jonathan Karp. Okay?
So the interesting thing about us is because we operate in so many different markets around the world, we publish different books in each and every one of them. So we might be publishing a book in one market, but we don't publish it in another market because of, again, editorial independence. So every editor and every imprint decides which books they want to publish. So the book that I'm reading right now is an interesting book because it's a book that we publish in the UK, but we not publish in most other markets around the world. It's Michael Lewis's book about Sam Bankman-Fried. I think it's called Infinite Jest or something. I forget exactly what the title was. But it's an interesting, we can talk about the book itself, but Michael Lewis I have an interesting tie with him because he started his career at the same company that I started my job career at, which was a company called Salomon Brothers. And his first book was a book called Liar's Poker, which was set in Salomon Brothers. And when I started basically the first job I ever had was at Salomon Brothers. And the required reading at that job was Michael Lewis's book, Liar's Poker, which was set in that company basically just 7 years ago. So I've read like most of his books that I followed him over time. And so whenever he publishes a new book, I usually try to read it if I can.
Is he getting it right? Because you were in the room.
No, but Liar's Poker was great. But this book, I have no idea whether he's getting this one right or not because I don't know about Sam Bankman-Fried. But yeah, Liar's Poker was a great book, but of course set in the 80s. So it was a very different time on Wall Street at that point in time.
What's coming up? Do you know of something that you're excited about that's coming out?
Yeah, the great thing about us is we really publish books across all ages.
Right.
So even if I start with and we have published different books in different countries. So if you start with the youngest audience with the preschool audience, and then because we're in Germany, for the first time we're actually publishing this wonderful television series that BPC has called Bluey in Germany. We have published it in many other markets around the world, but we're starting it in Germany right now. For the young adult audience, we are coming out with Christopher Paolini's book called Murtaugh, which is set in his Aragon universe, and it is the first book he's written at the universe after more than a decade, which we're also publishing across multiple companies. And on the adult side, we just published Arnold Schwarzenegger's book. in the English language world, and we're publishing a Barbara Streisand memoir, which is going to be fascinating.
You are into the Californians, aren't you?
Yes.
No, that's great. These are fascinating.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is just like the very, very tippy tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, of course. So many books.
Yes.
This has been a great conversation. I know I'm going to have to let you go. I realize we're right on time here. But I can't thank you enough. This has been great to have this much time with you and to get to hear so many of your thoughts. Thank you, Nihar.
No, you're very welcome, and thank you for all the wonderful questions and the great conversation.
No, it's a pleasure. And I'll just say quickly, we have 4 independent publishers coming in for our next session. If you could stay with us at 11, that's when we start. Great to see all of you. We're here all week, so come back many times, please. Thank you all.